Awesome. So Michael, I'm going to hand things over to you if you want to give us a brief introduction and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Maggie. So glad to be here for y'all to have me from Milwaukee, JS, neighboring state. Yes, I'm from sunny Iowa. Sounds like slushy there. It was maybe the cold front that hit us is going to hit you guys here soon. It's pretty icy today. So as she said, I formerly worked with Hy-Vee. I think you guys may have a few of those out there. Hy-Vee Grocery. I worked at the pharmacy, so it's been a year, quite a year with the COVID pandemic. And now I'm going to be starting on with startups. I'm pretty excited with that. Trying something new, focusing as a front-end developer. I'm definitely curious to learn more about everyone else here. So feel free to, use the chat if you want to say something, or if I ask questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you want to share your face. I'm always happy to see faces. I understand as we're recording, that might not be something everyone's comfortable with. So yes, happy you were all here. One reason I would like to get to know everybody is because there's a lot of content in this talk, and it's hard to prepare talks that are good levels for everyone. So that will be a lot of what I'll be doing, is finding out like who's familiar with React, who's familiar with Redux and hooks that we're going to be talking about, all that good stuff. So I'll go ahead and dive in. It's about me, where you can reach me at McLenners at all the things, at email, GitHub, and Twitter. Don't tweet very much though. I've been in web development for 4 years now. I love learning and I love teaching and sharing. That's why I'm here, and I love user experience and developer experience. And that's, really what this talk goes into, is what is the developer experience like using the context API, using hooks versus using Redux. All right, so what is our game plan tonight? We're gonna overview state management as a whole, like what is it? Why do we need it? And then we're gonna talk about some methods for state management. Redux is a big one. I guess let's have our first show of hands then. Who here has used Redux in their professional or personal life? We got one hand up, a few more thumbs up. Awesome. So it looks like, I'm curious for everyone else, have we used React? Is there anyone here? Let's go with like, is there anyone that's new to React in the room? Anyone that's like just dipping their toes here? All right, cool. Naj, if that's how we say your name, welcome. Cool. So it sounds like we have varying levels of understanding. So we'll take a second to discuss Redux and what that is, and then talk about some other forms of state management approaches like prop drilling, and go over a simple code example. And we'll refactor that using context. And then we'll go over a little bit more complicated example of prop drilling and use something called Formic for form state management. And then we'll also refactor that with context in 2 different ways. And then after we've had our fill of context, we'll also make a custom hook if we have time. And then also, if we have time and the appetite for it, we'll also hop back into Redux and talk about the advances that Redux has made with Redux Toolkit, and see how use context can be compared to Redux and Redux Toolkit, and why one might be preferable over the other with modern development. Any questions on this overview or interests or anything we want to shout out? Guess it'd be good if I have the chat open. All right. Oh, looks like, yeah, we have some members from Vue.js and Python world. I really need to get into Vue. It's an exciting thing. Although Svelte, I think, might be where I'd go next if I venture outside of React. It's just so much fun with React. All right, so state management. State management is anything within your application that needs to be to set what state your application is in, and also the memory that it's stored in. So you could think of like, is a modal open or close? Has the user filled out a form? Like, what's the data in the form? Have they submitted a form? Is there an error on the screen? If the user hits refresh during any of these, like, will their form data come back? What kind of screen will they land on after refreshing? You know, this is important for the last point here, light mode versus dark mode, right? If I set dark mode on a website because there's that toggle, I want to be able to refresh and see that it stays in dark mode. So that's state that persists beyond the in memory storage of the application, I guess, in local storage or wherever the developer chooses. So all of these are examples of state within an application. And Ken C. Dodds is a great inspiration for me. I'll reference him in his course that kind of got me down on this path. And this quote from him saying that managing state is arguably the hardest part of any application, because, you know, state goes all over. You know, it's not just those things I listed, but it's also user data stored in a database, you know, can be thought of as state. You know, what information are you showing in a table? You know, all that is state that has to be managed in your application. And there's lots of different levels and a lot of things going on here. So that's state as I see it and the way I'm looking at it. We're not going to get into too many complicated examples. We're just going to be looking at state in the form. So any questions there? Now let's look at Redux real quick. I have this 3 principles of Redux. So Redux, it stores the state of the application inside of a single store. So inside your single store, you could have different pieces of state that's stored there. And in order to change the state, you have to emit an action. You have to say, hey, this action happened with this payload, make this change to the state in the store. And how does that change happen? It happens through a reducer. So the action data comes through and the reducer takes that and updates the store. That's interesting. Heather just mentions functional programming and trying to eliminate state. And I'm curious to see how that works or fits in here once we get into this. So this is I'll open the GIF format of it. Here, I'll put it in the chat as well. So this is an example of a UI making an action. The action is to deposit some money, and that I guess event dispatches an action. You have a click event or a form submit event, and it dispatches an action. That action has the payload of $10. The action type is deposit. And so then the reducer says, hey, you want to deposit $10. I have a reducer that's built for that action, and I'm going to update the state from $0 to $10. And then I'm going to send that state back to the UI, the component, and say, here you go, UI, here's the new updated state. So this is one-way data flow that Redux follows. And with that, you can't update the state directly. You're not supposed to update stores. The only way that you update the state is by dispatching an action and processing that action within a reducer. Might seem a bit rigid, but as we learn in programming, a lot of times rigidity offers us channels to walk within. But sometimes it could be a little too rigid and too cumbersome. So I'm curious, who's had experiences on one way or another? Who really loves Redux and would like to use it more? Who has been burnt by Redux just because it's a pain, or who's in the middle? Malcolm's got tons of experience with it, loves it. Any other plus ones or minus ones? So some are still looking to get more experience with React and Redux, or decent experience with React, sorry, but want to get into Redux. Nice. So it looks like there's a lot of people who enjoy Redux out here, which is awesome. I don't try to yuck anyone's yum. And maybe I'll be the advocate for this voice, but my experience, I took a course on Redux before joining a prior team, and they needed a React developer, front-end developer, and so I was that person. And they chose to use Redux because another tech lead set them up with it. And I had trouble managing all the files in Redux. And so there's like action types and action creators, and there's your reducers with switch statements, and it just like was very cumbersome for me. But you know, that was my role, and so I figured it out, and that was the one that everybody went to when they needed to add something to Redux. And so I took them through the path, you know, first create your action type, create your action creator, add a reducer, and then ask for your state by connecting it to your component with the connect. It's a lot of parts, and that's the main con that I've heard. One, that it's great, it has a centralized state that and it has this framework for you to follow, but at the same time there's just a lot going on with it, and you have to open five different files and to track your way through. And it's also, if you dispatch with an action type directly, it's just the grepability is sometimes hard to search, like where is your things happening from. So it's a great tool. It's very powerful, but at the same time, for new developers and for people coming into it, it's a lot to learn. So we'll see if we can circle back to that at the end, though, because Redux Toolkit has a lot of amazing things going on for it, and that offers solutions for this. Any other final words before we start hopping into some code here in a minute? All right, I will warn you, my headphones are dying, so I might have to pop them off here in a second. Yes, so I'm gonna give you all in the chat this diagram I'm going over. And then also I'm going to give you the code base that I'm gonna be working off of in case you wanted to pull that down and start checking it out. Okay, just switching screens here real quick. Okay. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay. This one. All right, so our first example, can you all see the Figma still now? Okay, so the first example we're going to go over is prop drilling, and prop drilling and how we can use context to circumvent it. So prop drilling is the method in React where you have a bunch of components. You have a parent component and you pass down state to child components, and you do that by passing props. It comes from the word properties, or so I believe. And so the parent passes down props to the children, and the children have that property information then to do stuff with in their components. It's, integral to how React manages re-rendering as well. And another thing is just props is very central. And the example we're going to look at here, we have an app component. This is on the first branch, the 0th branch. We have an app component. We use a hook called useState, which gets us a state variable, and then a method here, setCharacter. The second method the second item in this array that's returned from useState is a setter method to set the character value. And so we pass both of these down to both this character form and this character component. And in the character form here, we pass in these props. We're destructuring these props here immediately. You can just sometimes see props here instead of the curlies and destructuring. And then we use the character here for this value. It's just a string. This is a default value. And then on change, we say what we want to do. We want to set the character to the e.target.value, which is the new value that is emitted from the event on change in the input field. Same thing with the character components. We pass in character and setCharacter. We display the character name. And then we also have a button here that when you click it, it sets the character to an empty string. So pretty simple. And I'm going to have that running here. And so what you can see is put apples. We see apples in the input field. We get apples in the character component. We click clear name and it clears the character. And so what we want to do is we want to get rid of this prop drilling that we see in the app component. So we don't want to pass down this character and setCharacter. What we want to do is use context. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at context real quick. What is context? Context does exactly what I just said. It provides a way for you to pass state directly to components without having to pass them down via props. It's not a state management solution alone, but it can be used with any other state management solution. And the API has come a long ways, especially with the hooks provided with the context API. Comes built in with React. Like I said, it's extensible with other state management solutions. And it's used in a lot of modern frameworks like Formic. And that's one of the reasons why I'm including Formic in this, this talk demo. So let's see context in action before we incorporate into our app. And heads up, I will ask a question at the end of this. So here we have a new context being created from React. It's called user context. And then we have this provider, user context.provider, chained off of that user context that React created for us. And we provide this value. And then what this use context hook does here in this other user component, you see this user component is a child of app. It use context is called with user context, so it can get the value provided to the provider. So the question is here then, what is this value here that's within this H1? Malcolm's got it, read. All right, so read is the value. And in case you had trouble tracking that, there's a value here is passed in from the provider. You call use context on that context and you get the value. This didn't have to be named value. You can call that whatever you want. But for this clear example, we showed it as value being passed through from the context. And so in this case, you're like, why not just pass it as a prop? But imagine that this user is like a great grandchild, or you have like 50 components you need to pass this state to. You're not going to want to pass it to every single component via props. It's much easier to use context to just pass it directly without passing it as props. Any questions there before we see this in action? All right, so let's end this prop drilling here in this trait example. So I'm going to bring in use context and create context. And I'm going to create this character context from create context. I'm not sure, I saw a question from Heather. The variable name can't be a reserved word like const or function. That's true. Yeah, if you try to call that const function equals that, it would get upset with you and be like, what are you trying to do with function? That's a reserved word. Is that what you meant?
Yes, that is what I meant.
Okay, you got me. You can't use just any old name for that variable. You have to use something not already taken. All right, so this character context, we're gonna wrap this with that character context provider, and we're gonna provide it a value. And the value that we're gonna provide is gonna be this return value from use state. And so this is where I said that you can use any state management solution that you want. You could use reducer here. You can also like create helpers, like create a helper method and pass that into the value as well. This could be an object that you destructure. But in this case, I'm just going to pass in the return value from use state, this getter and setter pair that you might want to think about it, variable and set variable method. So ultimately, we're not going to need these passed through anymore. Our app's going to break. It's going to be like, I don't know how to set character because it's no longer being passed in. You know, these props aren't being passed in anymore. They're undefined. You can't call undefined. So things are getting real wonky. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my context in these components. Just got to change this component to have a curly and return. What it was shorthand for returning JSX. You could use parentheses instead. But here I want to return because I want to do this. I'm starting to use Copilot, and it's like knows my life, I guess. So I want to use character and set character destructure from use context, pulling in that character context. So once again, just like we saw in this example, this value is being passed in as the value, return value from use context. We're getting the same thing here with this, this get and set pair. And then we could do the same thing down here. And then everything should be peachy again. So real quick, simple refactor, no longer prop drilling, and we're using this character and set character from context. So last chance for questions on like the basics of this or to affirm your understanding before we dive into a little bit more complicated of an example. Yeah, that's right, John. It gets rid of a bunch of props. So we had prop drill hell going on at one point, and that's when we pulled this into our code base at work. Was you're like, this just is too many props that we're passing down, and we need to get rid of some of them. And this was how we did it, was sharing it with context. You could also do it with Redux too. Yeah.
What editor are you using?
This is VS Code, Visual Studio Code. All right, so I'm going to reset that. If you follow along in the code base that I shared, I have these branched out. So this was 0 that we started with, 0 after I finished. We're going to be moving on to this more complicated example of prop drilling. And so let me start with showing you what this application looks like. Some of you might recognize what's going on here with what I built here. So it's just another form, Fuji. I can say the player is me, and background is juicy, race is fibrous, and alignment is neutral, and you can put in some strength, dexterity, constitution modifiers here. You don't have to fill out the full form. You can submit it, and then it'll put the values over here on the right. So it's analogous to what we just went through, right? Where there was one form field, submit it, and then you have a display, and then you have a clear button. Except in this case, we have multiple fields as opposed to one field that we're managing on our state. So we're going to have an object that's controlling all this state. And we're going to have those the state updated by updating that object. Yes, Heather, great improvement is the offer roll stats button, just to save us a little bit of time. So I created some diagrams. I think I forgot to go over my diagram for this simple state, simple example here. This was what we had before with the app component, character form that set the character component that also set the character with the reset button. So right now we have a little bit more complicated of an example. We have the character component still that displays the character, and then also has that button that you can reset the character. And then we have a character form component. And the character form component brings in Formic. And Formic, it passes over the state to Formic, and Formic then controls the state within the form until you hit the submit button. Then on submission is called, and the character is set, propagates through to your character component. So I call this a little state swap party because the character form passes off the state to Formic. Let's take a look at what Formic is real quick. So Formic is says it builds forms in React without the tiers. So it's kind of like the popular kid on the block at the moment. You know, with React, there's so many open source packages. You know, there's Redux forms.
And put my headphones away real quick. All right, can you all still hear me?
Yep, you're good. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Maggie.
If I can hear.
Okay, so the Formic, we got Formic now, and then I've even heard of there's a hooks version of the form, like form hooks or something like that. So Formic is what my team's gone with. Part of the reason why I was in this talk, but also it builds in with context very nicely. So Formic offers a lot of it offers a way to get values in and out of the form state. It offers validation and error handling, complex error handling with Yup, if you've heard of that package. And then it also handles the form submission. So it's kind of like a great form helper within React. This is an example of it, where you have Formic, your component pulled in from Formic, and you provide Formic some initial values. And then you can provide this validate block, which says like, okay, if there's no email, if the values don't have an email on it, then throw an error saying it's required, do some regex on the email, that type of stuff. And then you provide a non-submit. I think initial values, you know, I don't know which ones of these are required, but on submit, you can call a method to do like a dispatch and async action, or like I'm doing in ours is we're actually setting the state from the hook on that submit. And then you have your component where you can pass in different props from Formic. Is submitting is one. We're going to see values as another prop, and on change is another prop that we're going to be passing in. So hopefully that makes more sense now that our character, the same character state that we saw before, that's now an object, is going to be passed in as initial values and then handed around as values within the Formic land. And then on submission, after we're done filling out the form, when we click submit, we're going to set the character value using set character in our on submit handler. So let's look at what that looks like. This is that new state that I was talking about, this object. And then our character form here has Formic, where we set our initial values with the character. And then on submit, once we're done, when we click submit on the form, we are going to set the character with those values. So that's the little state swap party. And then we have attribute inputs and ability inputs. The attribute inputs are all different. Our name, player, background, race, alignment. And you see all of these use that values, the values that come from Redux, or oh my gosh, mine's on Redux right now. The values that come from Formic. And then this handle change that's called on each of these is also passed as a prop and called on each component. Ability inputs is a little bit different. We use the same ability input component over and over again, and pass in the values and handle change and this name, and this component is reused because it's a lot more similar, whereas ability inputs are slightly different for each, and I have this H3. Just how I decided to build this with this slight variation in how this is architected. Still, hopefully a fairly simple example. The character component is still pretty similar. On click, you reset the character value, and then we just iterate through the character key values and display them. So any clarifications we want on this new app before we start replacing prop drilling and this top part with context again?
I just had a quick Formic question.
Yeah.
So when using Formic, that handles all the state updates for the form, correct? So we don't have to update the state in our component for the form inputs like we normally would if we weren't using Formic. It handles that until it's submitted, and then on submit, then it would update our component state.
Yeah, so these inputs, we're still using the value.name.
Okay.
We're still providing a value. So this is still a controlled input, is
Gotcha.
what it's
Okay.
called, controlled, when you pass in a value and handle the change.
Okay.
But that value is coming from Formic. And so Formic is managing its values and handling the change. It's not our character, set character that's managing that state and change.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So it's this stuff up here that we're going to be working through with context. So let's again bring in use context and create context. Character context equals create context. You can provide a default value here as well if you didn't provide a provider, but that's typically you want to create a custom provider, and we'll show that in a little bit, how to get around that so that you can provide an error saying, hey, you got to use this context within a provider. And so this value again is going to be this character and set character. And then we can get rid of these guys. I'm going to make this bigger. All right, so now we're in our character form. We're getting rid of these. And so I want to use in this character form, use context. And so I want to pull in, oops, return. So I'm going to call this character set character because that is what we are providing as a value. And does anyone remember what did we have to pass into this use context?
The name of the context and the variable?
Exactly. Yeah, this context that we created needs to be provided into this use context hook. It was easy before because we were, in the same file. It's not too difficult here. We just have to export it. App. And then we can use this context here. So we just exported it here. Now we're importing to use that context. And now we can do the same thing here in this character component. We can use context and we have to bring in that use context import. I don't think I need React because of the version of React I'm using. And then we also need to bring in this character context. Oh, this is getting upset because I'm still trying to destructure these props. So that should be, unless I mess something up, can't resolve app. Oh, you know what? It's not on the same level. It's up one directory. So go. All right. Let's see if that's working. All right, sweet. So we replaced prop drilling with context in these cases. And now we don't have to pass the props in here. It just knows through the use of context. And context for class-based components, it looks like Dave D asked about. I have not used it. I've been pretty fortunate not having to use it or not use class-based components. And I think there is a version of the context API. Yes, yeah, it's the consumer. You can use this context.consumer and pass in a value. That's the way I originally learned to use context, was with this context.consumer, just like there's a context.provider. So I think that is the way you can use it in a class-based component. Yeah, context has been around since before functional components, so you don't have to just use the use context hook. All right, so we replaced our use of context here. We wrap this app in a provider, and we're passing in the character and set character not as props, but directly as using the context. And it would be nice if we could do the same thing here with Formic as well. Like, why do we have to pass in these values? Is there some way that we can just get the values over here without having to pass them through? And the answer is yes, there is. There's something called use Formic context that comes directly from Formic. And we can pull that in, import use Formic context from Formic. And we can use that to get values and handle change from use Formic context. And then we don't need to pass in these values and handle change which one is this for? Attribute inputs. And you could also partially replace it here. I just replaced it in attribute inputs, but I didn't change it in ability inputs. And everything is still working as expected. So you don't have to replace, in this case, with the formic context, I'm just partially replacing the prop drilling. We're going to go ahead and continue to replace it here in ability inputs. And in ability inputs, I can do the same thing for values and handle change. But you know what? If I look at this, I don't really need values and handle change. The only reason values and handle change were passed to abilities itself was to then pass down into the ability input. So that's just like useless prop drilling there. So I can really bring in this use formic context into this ability input. And as our diagram here shows, bypass this ability inputs. I don't need to prop drill through that anymore. And I could get rid of this values and handle change. And then in here, you can see how much this cleans this up. We only need to pass in the name through. And then if I imported and did everything right, our app should still work. Yep, there we go. So that was also a game changer for us, is realizing we were using formic and we were passing values and set values up and down, well, I guess mainly down the component tree, passing those props down, and it was painful. So realizing that formic provides this use formic context was really a game changer for us to be able to just pull from that context rather than having to prop drill those values all over the place. All right, so that concludes part 4, I believe 3 or 4. Context for me, context for formic. Then there's something that we might notice here. What's the difference that we notice between this context and this context? So use formic context and the context that I've created. There's a slight difference in the API and the call value there.
Wait, why is the input type number for name? Oh, I see. It's an ability.
So definitely the return value is different here. This is a destructured object, where this is a destructured array. Use formic is context provided by formic, whereas the other one is created by us, definitely. So I guess, do you think that there's an improvement we can make to our use of context here so that we can use it like formic? Because like formic, you don't have to pass in, you don't do like use context and then call in formic context. Somehow it's packaging all that up into this, I'm going to give it away, this custom hook here. It's this use formic context that provides everything we need. We don't need to pass in the formic context. So that's the next step in this progression for making your this even more usable for consumers who are probably your colleagues, or if you're creating a package for external consumption, is we can wrap this in a custom component so that all we have to do is call something like use character. And we don't have to actually pass in the character context anymore. So let's go ahead and check that out. I want 3. Okay. So here we have this, and really like this context is created in our app component, and our state is managed from the app component provided to the provider. So like this is a lot we're exposing to our components, separation of concerns wise, we might want to extract all of that into some sort of helper, right? So that we don't have to expose all of this to the consumer. If they need to make changes to add state fields or something, then they can hop into that helper and change it. But let's create a helper here to separate our concerns a little bit. So we're going to create hook context. Naming is hard. We're going to call this character. And what we're going to create in our character context after we call it .js is we're going to create export const character provider. We're going to create a character provider. And that's going to be able to replace this character provider here. And then we're going to create use character hook. Thanks, Heather. I appreciate that. Naming is hard. It's try my best, but sometimes I look back on something I named and I'm like, what was I thinking? So our character provider is going to do a lot of what's done here. We're going to, first of all, have our character context available here on the top level. Our character provider is going to instantiate the state that we want to use. And then it's going to return this character provider with this value. And there's different ways, like we need to pass through the children. There's a special prop called the children that, if you're not familiar, that takes these values and pushes it into here. We can put the props.children here, or we can destructure the props here, and that will also pass in the children. So what this offers us, I'm just going to bring over my imports here. What this offers us is we can now use this character provider instead of what we were using from character context provider. However, we still need to create this use character helper. This use character helper is basically going to call use context helper. Use character custom hook is going to call use context. And it's going to get this context value, which is still the array. I'm just going to call it context. So I can say, if there's not a context, it's probably because I have like 6 different branches with all this information. So Copilot's like, yeah, we know what this is. Use character must be provided within a character provider. We want the user to let them know, hey, you're using this hook outside of a context provider that's needed. And otherwise, we're going to return that context for consumption. So all of this is going to package up all these things we've done. So we could start whipping it out and replacing some of this and cleaning up the API for this state management. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's start here with the app. Let's replace this character provider. And we have to import that character provider. Context character. And then we don't need this anymore because this is managed internally. And then here with this character set character, we don't need this context. What we want to use is use character. That's where Copilot and tab 9 here, they're like, hey, you want to use context for this, right? No, I've got a new kid on the block called my custom hook that I want to use. Get rid of those two. So you can see here, it's starting to come across that, hey, you have a handle to get your character, you have a handle to set your character. Don't really worry about like what's behind the scenes to manage that state. Just worry about updating the state. And you could imagine creating other custom helpers, to make it easier for you to manage all of this. Like this right here, maybe instead of having this, we can have another helper that we could export called called like reset character that sets it to the original value. Yeah, I mean, I was going to try and say your name, Bashish. I asked if I was using GitHub Copilot. Yes, I'm using Copilot and tab 9. So I'm getting all the autocomplete auto suggestions. Tab 9 is before Copilot, does a bit of AI to predict what you're trying to type. So that is, let's just make sure this is working. Yep, all right. I saw Heather mentioned I had too high of a value, and I did set a limit here. Max value of 100. Didn't want anybody trying to get too OP here with this. So what we've done now is gone from using this context provider situation to where we use this provider and we call use character in these two different spots. We don't have to import anything else. We just have this custom hook, just like Formic provides. Formic provides this use Formic context. We provide this use character just to pull it in directly. Cool. Is there any questions about that or concerns, anything y'all want me to dive a little bit deeper in or to hash over again in what I just did? It might also be helpful to come on here and you can like look at, say, this use character, and you can compare. Hopefully you can do this too. Maybe I just can because I am the creator. And then look at branch 3. So compare branch 4 going into branch 3. And you can see the changes. So we got rid of the state management. We got rid of this context provider. And now we're just importing this character provider. And then similar here. Don't mind the style changes. That's just me changing my mind as I was working through this. Instead of using context with the character context, we're now using this custom hook called use character. Same here, use character as a custom hook instead of pulling in use context and wrapping it around our context that's exported. And then this is the the behind the scenes, what's happening within our character provider and our context, our custom hook that's getting our context for us. Okay. Well, if there's no thoughts or questions on that, we can continue in this application and take a look at some Redux and give y'all a taste of like what's happened with Redux in the past few years and Redux Toolkit and the difference that that provides. There's two places that I provide extra resources. One is here on the Figma and one is in my README. If you're curious to learn more about these things, I'll just plug these resources. There's Ken C. Dodd's Epic React course that taught me about the usage of context. And then there's these two podcasts that I really enjoyed and listened to several times over the past year. One is by Ken C. Dodds about hooks and just React in general. And then the other one's by Mark Erickson. Mark Erickson is the current maintainer of Redux and took over Redux after Dan Abramov. And Mark Erickson's the creator of Redux Toolkit, which is the new sanctioned way of creating Redux where you can avoid creating action types and you can create a slice of state, defining your reducers. Actually, with state mutability with Redux Toolkit, you no longer have to stick to immutable state because they use immer under the hood. And then exported from your reducers, you have actions from your create slice, you have action and reducers that get exported. So you don't have to have a separate action creator file. Async actions are really easy to create. It comes baked in with reselect as well. So you can create custom selectors that only update based off of specific state change. So all of that and more in this podcast. If you're looking at converting from old form Redux, OG Redux to modern Redux, there's this tool, this tutorial here that I've used a lot in helping me kind of convert things with my team. And then there's people who get crazy. There's this person here who wrote this blog about use reducer, a hook, and toolkit where they put toolkit's returned reducer and use it using the hook use reducer and didn't actually use Redux. It was kind of wild. So those are available in both places, all these. It looks like Heather said using, oh, did I have a typo somewhere? Where is that at? Oh yeah, connects. Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
All right. So we can take a look. Like I said, unless you have questions about hooks and this context, I'd be happy to spend the rest of the time giving you a little tour of Redux Toolkit as well.
Actually, one question: when you have that check to keep a net to read from being over 100, where is that check?
Good question. Here, it looks like I set min max on this. So that's one place where if I try to do -5, I put min max on this input, but where is that actual text coming from? Value must be greater than.
And is there a way to do something more complex, like maybe number must not be prime or something?
So I think that that specific error text is coming from Formic itself. Because I didn't put any special validations on here. I just put a min, or maybe that's, I don't know, that might, if you put min max on, thanks, Greg. So yeah, if you put min max on a normal input, it might be native HTML validation. But there is a validators hook or property you can set here on Formic. So that's how you would do more complex validations, is you would, I think we showed it in our slides, you can get the values and check the values in this validator method. Like here, this validate block, you check the values. If the you could do your prime check there.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be something I would lean on Formic for. All right, let's see. Could check out 5. Redux Connect. Good. It does not like the changes I've made. Okay. All right. So just to orient ourselves real quick, this is the same application, just popped on over to Redux. We have a store that's created from our root reducer. Our root reducer combines our character and character reducer. And our character reducer takes in this initial state. It has 2 actions, update character and clear character. Update character returns the state and then spreads the action payload. And then clear character returns the initial character. Action type and actions are pretty straightforward, similar to what you probably have in a classic OG, so I call it Redux setup. So now Redux Toolkit, let's see here, you can install it with this npm install Redux.js Toolkit. And what it is going to replace is the vanilla Redux. So let's see, let me just make sure. Yeah, okay, so everything's working in this application with our Redux here. So I just installed Redux Toolkit. And so what we're going to is configure store from Redux Toolkit. And then our configure store is going to replace this combine reducers. And it takes an object, and the main, there's a few things that this gets passed into it. It's required to have reducers passed in. And so we're going to use our character reducer as our main reducer. Don't need combined reducers anymore. And we actually don't need this store file anymore either now. There's a few other things that configure store offers you to do. Set up some middleware. What is this? Okay, from the store here. It allows you to set up some middleware, some of the standard ones, I think, like making sure you don't have, you only have serializable objects in your store, and the React Redux, developer tools, it sets up automatically, but you can customize all of that if you want to. Let's see here. So I'm going to pop open this tutorial here. I'm not seeing this change in my diff. So we imported, so this is our store itself that's exported from configure store. So what we can do here in the app is, instead of pulling this in from Redux store, we're just going to pull that in from Redux reducer itself. And then we're going to have everything working. Right. So that under the hood, let's see if I have any more Redux. There's bind action creators from Redux. I think you can just pull these in directly from Redux.js toolkit. Let's see, does this still work? Yep, still works. And then at this point, you can uninstall Redux. So that's like the basics of converting from Redux to Redux Toolkit, the minimum that you have to do. But if you just stop there, you're not really getting the benefits of it. What the benefit is around these action types, actions, and creating the reducer. So with the reducer, we're going to import create slice from toolkit. And we're going to create a slice. We're going to call this character slice. And we have to provide a name, and we have to provide an initial, I think it's initial value, not initial state. And then we provide some reducers. And this is where I said you no longer need to have immutability, and you also no longer need to use a switch statement. So as this is suggesting, we pull in this update character, pass in state and action, and we can return the state and our action.payload. And then we're also going to have clear character, and we're just going to return our initial character. We're just going to check this, create slice, initial state. Okay, I guess, yeah, it is initial state. Copilot knew better than me. Maybe it was Formic that was initial values. Okay. And here we don't really need to pass these two in, but that's fine. So now we have this character slice, and what we can do from that is we can export our actions from the slice.actions, and we could export our reducers from the slice.reducer. So under the hood, this is using two different things called create actions and create reducer. So you can use them separately if you want. I'm working on a project right now that uses Toolkit, so I'm really steeped in it and actually loving it. But the project manager likes to create his actions and create the reducer separately, whereas I just like to create it all in a slice. But that's because just architecture-wise why he wants to do it. But so we can export this update character and clear character from the actions, and then export the character reducer from character slice dot reducer. And then back over here where we're bringing in our character reducer. Putting it in curlies because I'm not exporting as Oh, what am I doing? I need to export. Export. Okay. So I'm not doing export default anymore. You can still default export this character reducer, and then this update character and clear character. Now, instead of having those actions come from my actions.js, I have to update them. Let's see here, update character, import this from character reducer. Update this. Okay, I guess that's the only one. And then clear character, also have to update that import to come in from character reducer. And let's see, no errors. Let's see, so still working, okay, still working. So what we can do now is we can say goodbye to these action types, delete those, say goodbye to the actions, these action creators. And right here in the character reducer, I have it all being exported directly from creating the slice. No, I think it's just upset because I deleted the file and it's like, I don't know where that file is anymore. So all of this is, okay, sorry, getting distracted by those red lines. All of this is created here in this create slice. You say what your reducers are, and then you can export the actions to use directly the same way my old action creators were. The reducer is also exported here. And then you can pull those in and use them just like you would use your regular old actions, right? So it cuts down on that boilerplate, makes things a lot more simpler. I still find it a little repetitive that I have to type this here and then come down here and then add it to this export destructure. I'm like, can't you just like, I don't know to do that for me, but I'm spoiled. I'm a spoiled millennial developer, I guess. It's a lot better than what I've experienced from Redux and having to create those action creators and action types. And you could still create custom actions and add them in. There's something called extra reducers here. And extra reducers is where you would put on your async actions or any custom actions that you want to add on. So it's just as extensible as you would have, and it even comes with these, canned, pending, fulfilled, and rejected states for you to update with in those extra reducers when you use async, create async thunks. That's another middleware that it comes in with automatically is thunks, async thunks, because who's not going to be doing those side effects with their reducers most of the days. So that's all I have for that. I lie, I do have a little bit more, but I am beat. If you want to look, I do have this Redux Hooks. It looks at changing over from Redux Connect to Redux Hooks, because we're all moving to functional components and we want hooks up the yin yang. So it shows here how you can get rid of map state to props, map dispatch to props, and use selector and use dispatch instead. So there's also that out there on the branch, on the repository.
Anyone have any other questions for Mike? All right. Well, this
Quiet crowd.
I know. It's because you've blown them away with all of this knowledge.
Now I'm like, well, at least we retained, I think, at least 75% from the start. So that's either they left their computer on and just running so they didn't want to make me feel bad, or we actually did captivate the audience.
Actually, one thing I'm wondering, how much work now after making all those changes, suppose now that you want to add an extra field to the form, say for hit points, what would you need to do?
I'm just sharing out the resources real quick. Good, Vashish. I'm glad you're still here. So for this one in particular, if you wanted to add an additional property here, like hit points, we could say HP. I guess manage it as a string as well, because there'll be an input. And then what I would do is in the character, I think these inputs, I think it's this one that I would add it in, just because it's the easiest place to add it from that. I think I would add it. Let's see if this will work. If I add hit points, welcome Dave, Quessy, I hope I said that right. And then this would be values.hp. The name would be hit points. And let's see. Did that work? Oh, no, it's not typing. Name, let's just change it to HP so it matches. I think this name has to match the value.
You're no longer showing your code, so we're still on the GitHub page now. I'm not sure if you're.
No, sorry, what? Let me see. New share. Do you see the application?
Oh, yep, I see it. Sorry, that could have been me. Apologies
Okay.
for throwing you off there.
So I don't know if we saw all that, but she has to add a new form, HP. So I added in the character reducer this HP field, and then I added this hit points field here. And then we could probably change that to an input. So hit points is 100, and we can submit it. And there we go. Now we have a new HP field. And it would be pretty similar for the context example as well. We would just go into that context helper, add that state to the initial state, and then we would go down to where we, the same place that I added it in just now in the form and add it in. And then the only thing that would be different in the context example would be we'd have to set it back to 0 when we cleared the state when we click the button, is the only additional thing in the other example that I showed. Good challenge. Thanks, Heather.
All right, so just
You're
for
welcome.
everyone's knowledge, I will share these links also on the meetup page. So all the resources that you shared with us tonight, and this is being recorded. So I will also upload the recording to our YouTube channel and share that link on meetup as well. So we have, so you can watch it again if you want to go through it in more detail.
Very cool.